Now, with the arrival that you just mentioned, did you always know that that was going to be wordless? I mean, when you started working on it, or did that was that a realization that came later?
It was a realisation that came later, but it's sort of fairly early later. So the original version of The Arrival, and what I was contracted for, was a 32-page picture book which had a double-page spread with images showing a strange city in which there's a small character who was appearing repeatedly, wandering around and kind of lost and bewildered. And then there would be a small caption or a small bit of text which was like, if you could imagine, an elderly immigrant telling the story of his arrival in the country in hindsight. And the text does not reveal that it's a fictitious country. So the text could equally apply to Australia or the United States or somewhere in Asia or anywhere. And so I was based around this irony between text and image. And I just found this idea less and less satisfying, and then eventually I just got rid of the text, and what happened was it slowed the images down so much more, and it took the pressure off the need to interpret. And I'm surprised I didn't realise that even earlier, like right from the beginning, because it made sense once I experimented with it, in the sense that the main character is illiterate. And so in order to make the reader illiterate, I would have to get rid of text, or actually put some text in, but make it in a language that nobody can read, and give us a real sense of what it's like to be that character. But actually, one of the main things, people talk a lot about the wordlessness in that book, but for me, the principal thing was to slow it down. I find when you put text with pictures, some people will read really fast. Like, I tend to do that too. Like when I'm reading comics, I read all the word bubbles, and I won't spend enough time looking at the pictures. So that's one reason I don't use word bubbles too, because I find that it speeds up the process of looking with my work, and my work is more slower. It's a slow world, not a lot of action, not a lot of dynamic things happening, everything kind of pretty static, and I want people to spend a long time looking at each image.
Were comic books an influence at all? I mean, did you read them?
Not much, no. My brother read Tintin, and that was about as close as I got to having some experience with comics. So it's kind of funny, because when The Arrival came out in the US, it was marketed as a graphic novel, without the label of children's literature. And suddenly everybody saw me as a comics creator, and I really don't feel like one, partly because I'm so unqualified. What happened when I started working on The Arrival, I realised, wow, this looks a bit like a comic. It's no longer a picture book. It's becoming long, and each page has lots of panels on it. I better start finding out what comics are. So I read Scott McCloud's Understanding Comics. I went and to my all the comics seem to be in the YA section, sometimes inappropriately. And I just went to my local library and I got a whole bunch of those out. Did my web research, found out, what were the major comics. So I read Mouse, I read Jimmy Corrigan, The Smartest Kid on Earth, and all these sort of very acclaimed comics. And that was kind of what I was looking for, is how do they move from one panel to the next? Mm-hmm. And along the way I came across Raymond Briggs's The Snowman, which is a silent picture book, which has a very similar format to The Arrival, because I borrowed his grid that he uses in his book, and that sort of felt like my space, somewhere between picture books and comics, not quite either, and that's what sort of suddenly changed the whole project of The Arrival around to becoming a much longer book, and looking something like The Snowman, actually. Because I realised The Snowman was an immigrant story. It was exactly the same kind of story that I was trying to tell, about a boy who makes a snowman, comes into his home, and the snowman is fascinated by light switches and taps and fridges and stoves and all these things that we take for granted. And that's exactly what I was trying to do with The Arrival, but with the reverse, by making all that world weird. So all the light switches are strange, and, things that we take for granted are difficult and surreal. And so I do owe a lot to coming across The Snowman. It's quite an old picture book, but I hadn't seen it before.
And in the comic book confusion, did anybody, ask you to write Superman or anything after The Arrival came out?
No, I have one friend who's always pressuring me to doing a superhero thing, but I didn't grow up with that, so it's not really planted in my subconscious as something exciting that I want to do. When I did go to the US, a lot of the people I was speaking to was like, when are you going to do another long form book, like The Arrival? And The Arrival is a real aberration for me. I actually didn't enjoy doing something of that length. I found that hard, and I much prefer something like Tales from Out of Suburbia, tiny little stories, because that's the way I think naturally. And even The Arrival, when you look at it, it's not a singular narrative. It's all these little stories bunched together that just happen to all link up. And so I get this sense that people kind of want me to do more comics, but I don't feel compelled to. So, and I don't, I really start with the idea, and then the form comes afterwards. So I know what the idea is. I don't know what it's going to look like. And I just keep playing around until I find something that is the best form I can find. So with The Arrival, that was the best form, and I feel it's unlikely I'll do a book like that again unless there's a subject that demands that treatment.
Do you want to take some questions from the audience?
Yeah, sure. Let's risk it.
Yeah, see how it goes. Does anyone in the audience have any questions?
I guess I just picked it up again, and I think keeping the stories very short, like limiting myself often to the objective of having a one-page story, felt safe for me. I think the thing with any creative work is it's all about confidence. It's a combination of skill and confidence, but you sort of can't get one without the other. It's like a tennis match, constantly going back and forth. And if I kept the stories short, I felt confident about them. But even then, I did have a lot of assistance from my editor as well, and I really needed that feedback to sort of know if something was working. But I did find, I was resurrecting these latent writing skills. All those years spent practicing writing sort of came back again. And I was reading a lot. I was reading a lot of short fiction that was. I was looking for things that was similar to what I had in mind, so like Haruki Murakami stories, that kind of weird dreamlike space, and Bourget and the Kelly Link stories. That kind of helped a bit just to come across those and go, oh yes, this is something that does work. I think I was helped by having the images as scaffolding as well. So if in doubt, I would switch to drawing and, see what I could do. So in the story, Grandpa's story, at one point the text can't really go anywhere, at least not with my skills I have available. So I just started drawing the story. So this text stops, and then it's silent images for about 6 pages, and then the text resumes. And in a way, that's probably what's helped me have the confidence to... It's the same with picture books, to write and illustrate is like... I just move to the other camp when I feel that, I can't sort of express something properly with words alone. And it's the same with pictures, because pictures are limited. If you want to express a fairly abstract concept, you can do it very succinctly and economically with words, where a picture might be very long-winded. And so I try and use the medium that best suits the idea. The animals sort of come up again and again, and sometimes I get a bit self-conscious about it. So, not another animal, What is it this time? Antelope? With Tales from Out of Suburbia, like there's turtles, there's reindeer, there's dogs and cats and buffaloes and dugongs, and I could go into a really long answer to that question about animals and the relationship between animals and an artistic way of looking at things. And it's something that's close to what I was talking about before about how children draw. There's something about animals that represent a stripped-down human state. I see animals as people, but they're non-human people. And they're often more direct in their desires and feelings, as simple as those might be. They're uncomplicated by wisdom. And this is the problem for adults, is that wisdom gets in the way. There's something fundamentally enigmatic about animals. They experience the world in the present, and their responses can be quite enlightening, whereas we will tend to rationalise and intellectualise things. An animal will respond very sincerely. The animals are projections of some human emotional qualities. So my animals are really animals as they are. They're sort of animals that have human attributes projected onto them, with the exception of intellect and wisdom, or the ability to communicate. And as a painter, I'm working in a silent medium, and animals are perfect subjects because they can't talk. They communicate to us silently as well. And I like the way that you can never entirely understand an animal. Anyone who says they know what their cat's thinking is deluding themselves. Nice to think that, but it's not the truth. And it's the same with a painting. If you're doing a really good painting, you inherently don't understand it. That's what I've learned to trust over the years, that I know a painting's failed when I understand it completely. I know every reason for every mark and bit and object. But when a painting's working really well, I understand it on a purely intuitive, emotional level that I can't intellectualise. And that's probably the problem I had studying art criticism and theory at university. I got to the point where I thought, frankly, some of this is bullshit. That painting is irreducible, and you can't sort of co-opt its cultural capital by talking about it constantly. And I dislike the way a lot of contemporary art is about talking about art and art responding to talk about art. I'm much more interested in just the image that speaks in a way that can't be reduced to words. And that's one reason also why in my stories the images and pictures rarely state the same thing. The words, it's very rare that the words will describe something atmospheric. The picture often does that, because they're the things that I find. You can do it with words, but I find it just works better for me with pictures, and just the mysteriousness. I'm probably not a good enough writer to be able to capture the kind of mysteriousness and ambiguity that I would like with words, so I rely on images which automatically have that anyway. Oh, a huge influence, especially looking at silent film, Italian neo-realist film. One film I looked at a lot over and over while I was starting to work on The Arrival was Bicycle Thieves, and or The Bicycle Thief as it's sometimes called. That's one reason why the story does start off in somewhere that looks a little bit Italian or something. I think it's just from looking at The Bicycle Thief so much, and that a family of two parents and a child in some kind of state where there's some crisis, and the simplicity of it. So in The Arrival, there's at one point he gets a job putting up posters. That's kind of a bit of a reference to Bicycle Thieves, where the main character's job is to put up posters. But film also, growing up in suburban Western Australia, film and television were my main artistic influences. And that's probably what got me excited about making pictures, going and seeing Star Wars, rushing home and drawing my own version of what Star Wars would look like if I directed it. The robots would look like this, the spaceships would look like this, and, stuff like that. So, And I look at film a lot. Sometimes it gets in the way of enjoying a film, the fact that I have to deconstruct it and look at it from an image point of view. And they should have done that cut a bit earlier and that sort of thing. The Arrival, actually, while I was working with my editor on that, the language I was using was all cinematic, almost like there was a script. We zoom out from a cabin, pan across to this. And so there might be some sketches in this slideshow which show sort of something that looks like a film storyboard. And I was thinking, why don't people do more storyboards that are polished drawings and just publish those? Why turn them into a film? Because the problem with film is it dictates how long you're allowed to look at each frame. And sometimes you want to look at... I'll often freeze a DVD so I can look at the forest or the city or some coloration. I really want to enjoy it as a painting. And it frustrates me sometimes that film is so kinetic. And so a book is a perfect in-between medium.
We have time for, I think, one more question.
Yes, early on, living in Western Australia, there was a children's literature centre called the Fremantle Children's Literature Centre, and I would go in there occasionally and discuss what I was doing, and the staff there had exhibited artwork from many children's books, looked at all the rough sketches by different illustrators, and I was able to get some feedback that way. In Melbourne, there's an informal group of picture book illustrators that meet, and we just call ourselves picture bookers, and we get together at someone's house, but it kind of ends up being more a sort of just a general party than a actual let's look at our folios. Occasionally, someone will have the conscientiousness to bring out some work and say, I really want some feedback on this project I'm working on, but a lot of the time you're just complaining about rates or publishers or something, and or just catching up, finding out what people are doing. I think those sorts of things are good. I have to say, I so much of my work developed in complete isolation, with just the sound of crows in the background in suburban Perth, and that suits me, that's just me. I think for other people, there's a lot of benefit to be had from forming groups and discussing work as a group. I'm also wary of other people's opinions on my work because I'm so susceptible to them. And they can be bad both if they're good observations or bad observations. So if somebody says this work doesn't look very strong, I'll be, oh my God, it's not strong, it's a failure. And then if somebody says that looks fantastic, I'll go, oh great, I don't have to do anything more, I can relax. And then later on I'll look at it and go, oh my God, it's terrible. So I've learned over the years to withhold showing my work to others until I'm pretty confident about it, almost to the point where I don't care what people say. And the exception is someone that you really trust, like a really good editor or a friend. But, even with my wife, I'm wary of showing her what I'm working on because anything she says is really going to affect me, if it's positive or negative. So best not hear anything.
Thank you for coming, and round of applause for Shaun Tan.
Thank you.